Dog fights off attackers to save owner. What happens next is unbelievable. How will this story unfold? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The sun was just beginning to set over the quiet suburban neighborhood, casting long shadows across the neatly manicured lawns. Michael, a young man in his late 20s, had just returned home after a long day at work. His German shepherd, Max, greeted him with enthusiastic barks, his tail wagging so hard it seemed to shake his entire body. "Hey, buddy," Michael said, kneeling to scratch Max behind the ears. "You've been holding down the fort, huh?" Max responded with a happy bark, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. The bond between Michael and Max was unbreakable. Michael had rescued Max from a shelter 2 years ago, and in return, Max had become his loyal protector and best friend. After changing into more comfortable clothes, Michael decided to take Max for his evening walk. It was a routine they both enjoyed, a time to unwind and explore the peaceful streets. Max eagerly grabbed his leash from the hook near the door, his excitement palpable. All right, Michael laughed, clipping the leash to Max's collar. "Let's go." The two stepped out into the crisp evening air, the world around them serene and quiet. Birds chirped in the trees, and the occasional car rolled by on the distant main road. Max trotted happily beside Michael, his ears perking up at every sound and movement. As they reached the edge of the park near their home, Michael noticed something unusual. A group of 3 men lingered near the entrance, their postures tense and their voices low. They were dressed in dark clothing, their faces partially obscured by caps and hoods. Michael felt a prickle of unease but pushed it aside. It was probably nothing. Max, however, was on high alert. His ears stood straight and his body tensed as he let out a low growl. "Easy, Max," Michael said softly, though he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The men noticed Michael and Max approaching and exchanged glances. One of them stepped forward, a crooked smile on his face. "Nice dog," he said, his tone casual, but with an edge that put Michael on guard. "Thanks," Michael replied curtly, pulling Max's leash slightly to keep moving. "Hold up," another man said, stepping in their path. "We just want to talk." Michael's grip on Max's leash tightened. "I don't have time for this," he said firmly. "Come on, Mac." But the men weren't backing down. "You've got a nice watch there," the first man said, pointing to the expensive timepiece on Michael's wrist. "How about you hand it over?" Michael's heart rate spiked. "Not interested," he said, trying to sidestep the group. The men closed in, their intentions clear. "We're not asking," one of them said, pulling out a knife. Before Michael could react, Max sprang into action. With a ferocious bark, he lunged at the man holding the knife, his powerful jaws clamping down on the attacker's arm. The man screamed, dropping the weapon as he tried to shake Max off. The other 2 men froze for a moment, clearly not expecting such a fierce response. But their hesitation didn't last long. One of them lunged at Max, trying to pull him off as accomplice, while the other went after Michael. Max released the first man and turned his attention to the second, his sharp teeth bared as he growled menacingly. The man backed away, fear flickering in his eyes. Michael, meanwhile, struggled with the third attacker, who had grabbed his arm and was trying to wrestle him to the ground. Summoning all his strength, Michael managed to push the man away, but he knew he couldn't hold him off forever. "Max," he shouted, his voice filled with urgency. Max immediately responded, darting to Michael's side and positioning himself between his owner and the attackers. His presence was intimidating, his growls low and threatening. The men hesitated, clearly realizing they were outmatched. "Let's get out of here," one of them muttered, clutching his injured arm. "You're lucky we're letting you go," another sneered, though his bravado was clearly forced. The 3 men retreated, their dark figures disappearing into the shadows. Michael watched them go, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. He turned to Max, who was still on high alert, his eyes scanning the area for any remaining threats. "You saved me, buddy," Michael said, his voice shaky with gratitude. He knelt beside Max, wrapping his arms around the dog's neck. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Max licked Michael's face, his tail wagging slightly as if to say, "I've got your back." Back at home, Michael cleaned up Max's fur, checking for any injuries. Thankfully, the brave German shepherd had come out unscathed. Michael, however, couldn't stop thinking about the attack. The thought of what could have happened without Max filled him with a mix of fear and relief. The next day, Michael decided to report the incident to the local police. He described the attackers and their actions, emphasizing Max's role in protecting him. The officer taking the report was impressed. "Sounds like you've got a real hero on your hands," she said with a smile. "Yeah," Michael replied, looking down at Max, who sat obediently by his side. "He's more than a hero. He's family." In the days that followed, Michael couldn't stop replaying the event in his mind. He realized just how much Max meant to him, not just as a pet, but as a true companion and protector. Determined to give back to the dog who had saved his life, Michael began researching ways to show his gratitude. He found a local trainer who specialized in advanced protection training for dogs. While Max already had impressive instincts, Michael wanted to ensure he was as prepared as possible for any future threats. Together, they began attending sessions where Max learned new commands and tactics to enhance his skills. The trainer, a woman named Lisa, was impressed by Max's intelligence and loyalty. "He's a natural," she said during one session. "You're lucky to have him." "No," Michael replied, watching as Max flawlessly executed a command. "He's one of a kind." The training sessions brought Michael and Max even closer. They developed a deeper understanding of each other, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. Michael marveled at Max's abilities, his respect and admiration for the dog reaching new heights. But Michael also knew that their encounter with the attackers had been a wake-up call. The world wasn't always a safe place, and he couldn't afford to be complacent. With Max by his side, however, he felt a renewed sense of security and confidence. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Michael stroked Max's fur, his mind drifting to the future. "No matter what happens," he said softly, "we'll face it together." Max rested his head on Michael's lap, his eyes filled with trust and affection. In that moment, there was no doubt in Michael's mind. He and Max were a team, bound by loyalty and love. The incident with the attackers not only left a mark on Michael, but also began to resonate in his neighborhood. News of Max's bravery spread quickly, thanks to Michael sharing the story with a few neighbors. It didn't take long before Max became a local celebrity. Neighbors who had once merely waved at Michael from a distance now stopped by to see Max, bringing him treats and praising him for his heroic actions. One neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, a retired schoolteacher, was particularly smitten with Max. "This dog is an angel," she declared one afternoon as she brought over a batch of homemade dog biscuits. Max wagged his tail appreciatively, enjoying the newfound attention. Michael couldn't help but chuckle at the fuss everyone was making. "He's definitely the hero of the hour," he admitted, patting Max on the head. Despite the attention, Michael remained cautious. The attack had reminded him that danger could lurk anywhere, even in their seemingly peaceful neighborhood. He began making small adjustments to his daily routine, avoiding secluded areas during walks and being more aware of his surroundings. Max, ever vigilant, seemed to sense this change. His watchful eyes scanned every corner, his protective instincts on high alert. A few weeks after the attack, Michael received an unexpected phone call. It was from a local journalist who had heard about Max's heroics and wanted to feature them in a story. Flattered but hesitant, Michael agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to highlight the incredible bond between humans and dogs. The journalist, a woman named Sarah, arrived at Michael's house the following day with a camera crew. Max greeted them with curious barks, his tail wagging cautiously as he assessed the newcomers. Sarah knelt down to his level, extending her hand for Max to sniff. "You're even more handsome in person," she said with a smile. Max, sensing her friendly demeanor, gave her a polite lick on the hand before returning to Michael's side. The interview was conducted in the cozy living room, with Max sitting proudly beside Michael. "Tell me about that night," Sarah began, her tone gentle but inquisitive. Michael recounted the events, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. He spoke about the fear he'd felt, the bravery Max had shown, and the unbreakable bond they shared. "He didn't hesitate for a second," Michael said, his hand resting on Max's head. "It was like he knew exactly what to do to protect me." As Michael spoke, Max seemed to understand that he was the center of attention. He sat upright, his ears perked, and his eyes bright, as if he were reliving the moment alongside Michael. The story aired a few days later, and the response was overwhelming. Viewers from across the city reached out to commend Max and share their own stories of loyal pets. Some even offered to send gifts or donations to support Max's continued training. One letter in particular caught Michael's attention. It was from a young girl named Emily, who wrote about her own German shepherd, Bella, who had passed away the previous year. Your story reminded me of Bella, she wrote. She was my best friend and protector, just like Max is for you. Thank you for sharing your story. It gave me hope. Michael was deeply moved by the letter. He wrote back to Emily, thanking her for her kind words and inviting her to meet Max if she ever visited their neighborhood. Life began to settle back into a routine, though the memory of the attack never truly faded. Michael and Max continued their training sessions with Lisa, who was impressed by how quickly Max mastered even the most advanced commands. He's got the heart of a warrior, she said during one session, watching as Max flawlessly executed a maneuver. And the loyalty of a saint. Michael couldn't agree more. He's more than I could have ever asked for, he said, his voice filled with gratitude. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Michael decided to take Max to their favorite hiking trail just outside the city. It was a place where they could escape the noise and busyness of daily life, surrounded by towering trees and the soothing sound of nature. As they walked along the trail, Michael felt a sense of peace that had been elusive since the attack. The air was crisp and filled with the earthy scent of pine, and Max trotted happily beside him, his tail wagging with every step. But the tranquility was short-lived. As they rounded a bend, Max suddenly stopped, his ears perked, and his body tense. He let out a low growl, his sharp eyes fixed on something up ahead. "What is it, Max?" Michael whispered, his own sense of unease returning. He followed Max's gaze and saw a figure in the distance. It was a man, dressed in dark clothing, standing motionless on the trail. Michael's heart skipped a beat as he recognized one of the attackers from that fateful night. The man hadn't noticed them yet, but Michael knew they couldn't risk being seen. "Max, heel," he said softly, and the dog immediately moved closer to his side. They began to backtrack quietly, but the man suddenly turned, his eyes locking onto Michael and Max. A smirk spread across his face as he started walking toward them. "Long time no see," the man called out, his voice dripping with menace. Michael's pulse quickened. He glanced around, searching for an escape route, but the trail was narrow and surrounded by dense forest. There was no way out. The man continued to approach, his smirk widening. "Thought you got away from us, huh? Looks like I've got a second chance." Michael's mind raced as he tried to think of a plan. Max stood firm by his side, his growls growing louder with each step the man took. It was clear that Max was ready to defend Michael, just as he had before. "Stay back," Michael warned, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. The man laughed, clearly unfazed. "And what you gonna do? Sick your dog on me?" Michael didn't respond. Instead, he gave Max a subtle signal, a command they had practiced during their training sessions. Max's growl ceased, replaced by a tense stillness as he waited for Michael's next cue. The man took another step forward, his confidence blinding him to the danger he was walking into. "You're out here all alone," he sneered. "No one's gonna save you this time." "That's where you're wrong," Michael said, his voice firm. With a sharp command, Max lunged at the man, his powerful body colliding with him and knocking him to the ground. The man cried out in shock and pain as Max pinned him down, his jaws inches from the attacker's face. "Call him off," the man shouted, his bravado crumbling in an instant. Michael stepped forward, his voice calm but unyielding. "You threatened me once. You won't get another chance." Max held his position, his sharp teeth bared as he growled low and deep. The man squirmed beneath him, clearly terrified. Michael pulled out his phone and dialed 911, his eyes never leaving the man on the ground. When the police arrived, they were stunned to find Max holding the attacker in place, his loyalty and training on full display. "Looks like we've got a real hero here," one of the officers said, patting Max on the head once he was called off. The man was taken into custody, and Michael provided a statement about the encounter. As they drove home that night, Michael couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of gratitude for Max. The dog had not only saved him once, but had proven his unwavering loyalty time and time again. "You're my guardian angel, Max," Michael said softly, his voice filled with emotion. Max rested his head on Michael's lap, his eyes shining with love and trust. The drive home from the trail was filled with silence, but it was not a silence of fear. It was one of understanding and reflection. Michael kept glancing at Max, who sat proudly in the passenger seat, his head held high as if he knew the weight of his actions. The moonlight streaming through the car windows illuminated Max's shiny coat, highlighting the powerful yet gentle creature that had once been just another dog in a shelter. "You've earned every bit of the praise people give you," Michael murmured, his voice soft yet steady. Max responded with a slight wag of his tail, the thump of it against the car seat bringing a small smile to Michael's face. As they pulled into the driveway, Michael noticed the familiar sight of Mrs. Thompson peeking out of her window. The elderly woman waved enthusiastically, her face lighting up as Michael stepped out of the car with Max by his side. "I saw the police car when you left earlier," Mrs. Thompson called out as she opened her front door and shuffled toward them. "Is everything all right?" Michael hesitated, not wanting to alarm her, but he knew there was no point in hiding the truth. "We had another run-in with one of the guys from that night," he admitted, his hand instinctively resting on Max's head. "But Max handled it." Mrs. Thompson's eyes widened, and she placed a hand over her chest. "This dog is nothing short of a miracle," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You're lucky to have him, Michael." "I know," Michael replied, looking down at Max with a mixture of pride and gratitude. "He's the best thing that ever happened to me." The following days were a whirlwind of activity. News of Max's second heroic act spread like wildfire, thanks to the officers who couldn't help but share the incredible story. It wasn't long before Michael started receiving calls from reporters and even local animal advocacy groups who wanted to feature Max in their campaigns. One evening, Michael received a particularly interesting phone call. The voice on the other end introduced herself as Karen, the director of a nonprofit organization that trains service and therapy dogs. "I've heard so much about Max," Karen said, her tone warm and inviting. "I'd love to meet him, and you, of course." Intrigued, Michael agreed to meet Karen at her organization's training center. When they arrived, Max immediately perked up, his nose twitching as he took in the scents of other dogs and people. The center was a bustling hub of activity, with trainers working one-on-one with dogs of all breeds and sizes. Karen greeted them with a smile, her eyes lighting up as she knelt to greet Max. "So, this is the famous Max," she said, scratching behind his ears. "He's even more impressive in person." Max wagged his tail, clearly enjoying the attention, while Michael explained the events that had led to their meeting. Karen listened intently, her admiration for Max growing with every word. "I think Max has the potential to do even more," Karen said after Michael finished recounting their story. "Have you ever considered training him as a therapy dog?" Michael raised an eyebrow, caught off guard by the suggestion. "I haven't," he admitted. "I mean, he's already so much more than just a pet. But therapy dog training, that's a whole new level." Karen smiled. "It's not about changing who he is. It's about channeling his natural instincts and loyalty to help others. Dogs like Max have a gift, and it's amazing to see what they can do when given the opportunity." Michael glanced at Max, who was now lying at his feet, his eyes watching Michael closely as if waiting for his approval. "What do you think, buddy?" Michael asked, crouching to scratch Max's neck. "Up for the challenge?" Max responded with an enthusiastic bark, his tail wagging furiously. Michael laughed. "I guess that's a yes." The decision to enroll Max in therapy dog training marked the beginning of a new chapter for both of them. The training sessions were rigorous yet rewarding, with Max excelling in every task thrown his way. He learned how to provide comfort to those in distress, how to remain calm in chaotic environments, and even how to detect subtle changes in people's emotions. Michael couldn't have been prouder. Watching Max interact with patients at a local hospital during one of their training exercises brought tears to his eyes. A young boy who had been withdrawn and unresponsive lit up the moment Max approached him, his small hands reaching out to pet the dog's soft fur. "You're a natural," Michael whispered to Max later that evening as they relaxed at home. "You make people feel safe, just like you do for me." As the weeks turned into months, Max's reputation continued to grow. He became a certified therapy dog, visiting hospitals, nursing homes, and schools, bringing joy and comfort wherever he went. Michael often accompanied him, witnessing firsthand the profound impact Max had on people's lives. One day, during a visit to a children's hospital, a little girl named Sophie caught Michael's attention. She was sitting alone in a corner, her head bowed as she clutched a worn stuffed animal. Max seemed to sense her sadness and gently approached, his tail wagging softly. Sophie looked up, her eyes widening as she saw Max. "Is he here for me?" she asked in a small voice. Michael knelt beside her, smiling. "He's here for anyone who needs him," he said. "Would you like to pet him?" Sophie hesitated before reaching out, her tiny hand trembling as it made contact with Max's fur. A smile slowly spread across her face, and for the first time that day, she began to laugh, a sound that brought tears to Michael's eyes. Moments like these reminded Michael why he had decided to share Max with the world. It wasn't just about the heroic acts or the recognition, it was about the connection Max created, the way he brought light to even the darkest moments. But despite all the attention and accolades, Max remained the same loyal, loving dog he had always been. At the end of each day, he was happiest curled up beside Michael, content in the knowledge that he was loved and appreciated. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Michael reflected on how much their lives had changed since that fateful night. "You've given me so much, Max," he said softly. "Not just your protection, but your love, your loyalty, and your heart. I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I'm grateful every single day." Max leaned against Michael, his eyes filled with trust and affection. In that moment, Michael realized that the bond they shared was unbreakable, forged in trust and strengthened by love. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together, man and dog, partners for life. The bond between Michael and Max had become legendary not just within their neighborhood, but far beyond. Social media posts, newspaper articles, and even local TV segments had painted the pair as an example of resilience, loyalty, and the healing power of companionship. Yet despite the growing attention, Michael kept their lives grounded. To him, Max wasn't a hero or a public figure. He was his best friend, his confidant, and his guardian. But fame had a way of attracting both admiration and scrutiny. One evening, Michael received a call that he wasn't expecting. It was from a major production company in Los Angeles. They wanted to create a documentary about Max's life and their journey together. "We've read every story about Max," the producer explained. "His loyalty, his bravery. It's something the world needs to see." Michael hesitated. The idea of cameras following them around, reliving the traumatic events, wasn't something he was entirely comfortable with. "I appreciate the offer," he said cautiously, "but I'm not sure this is something Max or I need." The producer, sensing his reluctance, softened her tone. "This wouldn't just be about the attack, Michael. It's about the journey you've both been on, the impact Max has had on so many lives. We want to show the world the beauty of what you've created together." Michael glanced at Max, who was lying on the floor beside him, his head resting on his paws. The dog's calm, steady presence was a reminder of everything they'd overcome together. After a moment of thought, Michael agreed. "All right," he said, "but Max comes first. If at any point it's too much for him, we're out." The production team arrived a few weeks later, their equipment filling Michael's modest living room. Max watched them curiously, his ears perked as he sniffed the unfamiliar gear. The crew was careful to move slowly, ensuring that Max felt comfortable with their presence. The filming process was both exhausting and exhilarating. Michael recounted their story in vivid detail, starting from the day he adopted Max from the shelter. "He wasn't the dog I thought I wanted," Michael admitted during one interview. "But he turned out to be exactly the dog I needed." The crew also captured Max in action, visiting hospitals and schools, interacting with children and adults who lit up at the sight of him. One particularly emotional moment came during a visit to a rehabilitation center, where Max spent time with a young veteran named Jason. Jason had been struggling with PTSD, and his sessions with Max had become a source of comfort and healing. "He gives me hope," Jason said, his voice thick with emotion. "When I'm with Max, it feels like I can breathe again." As the documentary took shape, Michael couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and vulnerability. Sharing their story on such a large scale was daunting, but it was also an opportunity to show the world what a dog like Max could achieve. When the documentary premiered, it was met with overwhelming praise. Viewers from around the world reached out to share their own stories of love and loyalty with their pets. Michael and Max became symbols of resilience, proving that even in the face of adversity, the bond between a human and their dog could overcome anything. But amidst the praise came an unexpected turn of events. One morning, Michael received a letter from a man named Greg. The letter was handwritten and filled with emotion, detailing a connection to Max that Michael hadn't anticipated. "I think Max might be the dog I lost 3 years ago," Greg wrote. "His story, his markings, even the way he acts, it's so similar to my dog, Rocky. I lost him during a move across the country, and I've been searching for him ever since." Michael's heart sank as he read the letter. The thought of losing Max, even to someone who might have been his original owner, was unbearable. But he also knew that if there was even a chance Greg was telling the truth, he had to investigate. Greg arrived at Michael's house a few days later, his eyes filled with hope and nervous anticipation. Max greeted him cautiously, his tail wagging as he sniffed the stranger. Greg knelt down, his voice trembling as he called Max by the name Rocky. To Michael's relief, Max didn't seem to respond to the name. He wagged his tail politely but quickly returned to Michael's side, his loyalty unwavering. Greg's shoulders slumped, and he let out a heavy sigh. "I guess I was wrong," he said, his voice tinged with sadness. I wanted it to be him so badly." Michael placed a reassuring hand on Greg's shoulder. "I'm sorry you lost your dog," he said sincerely. "But if there's one thing I've learned from Max, it's that these animals have a way of finding the people who need them most. I'm sure Rocky is out there, helping someone just like Max helped me." Greg nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you," he said quietly. "And thank you for taking such good care of him. He's exactly where he's meant to be." The encounter with Greg left Michael reflective. It was a reminder of how easily life could change, how the paths we crossed often led to unexpected destinations. Max had been a gift, a guardian, and a companion in ways Michael could never have imagined. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Michael spoke softly to Max. "You've changed my life in more ways than I can count," he said. "And I promise I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you know how much you mean to me." Max leaned against Michael, his warm presence a constant source of comfort and strength. Together, they sat in peaceful silence, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side. Life returned to its usual rhythm after the encounter with Greg. The documentary's success brought more attention to Max, but Michael made sure to protect their quiet, everyday life. For all the media buzz and public admiration, Max was still a dog who loved nothing more than morning walks, belly rubs, and treats after dinner. One sunny afternoon, as Michael and Max strolled through the park, they encountered a young woman sitting on a bench. She was visibly upset, her face buried in her hands. Max immediately noticed her distress and tugged gently on his leash, guiding Michael toward her. "Excuse me," Michael said softly, stopping a few feet away. "Are you all right?" The woman looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "I'm fine," she replied quickly, though her trembling voice betrayed her words. Her gaze fell on Max, who was now sitting patiently, his head tilted as if studying her. "This is Max," Michael said, sensing she needed a moment to collect herself. "He has a way of knowing when someone needs a friend." The woman hesitated before reaching out to pet Max. As her hand touched his fur, her shoulders relaxed and a small smile appeared on her face. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I didn't realize how much I needed this." Michael sat down on the bench beside her, letting Max work his magic. Over the next few minutes, the woman opened up about the struggles she had been facing, financial difficulties, a recent breakup, and the overwhelming feeling of loneliness. Max stayed by her side the entire time, his calm presence offering comfort without judgment. "You're lucky to have him," the woman said finally, scratching behind Max's ears. "He's special." "I know," Michael replied, smiling. "He's changed my life in ways I can't even put into words." Moments like these reminded Michael of Max's incredible gift, the ability to connect with people on a level that went beyond words. It wasn't just his loyalty or bravery that made Max special. It was his capacity for compassion, his instinct to be there for those who needed him most. As they continued their walk, Michael thought about the woman on the bench and the countless others who had been touched by Max's presence. It was a humbling realization that their journey together had become something much bigger than either of them. But even heroes needed rest, and Max was no exception. That evening, as Michael prepared dinner, he noticed Max lying on his bed, his eyes heavy with sleep. The day's adventures had clearly taken their toll, and Michael couldn't help but chuckle at the sight. "You've earned it, buddy," he said, placing a bowl of food beside Max's bed. "Take it easy tonight." Max wagged his tail lazily before digging into his dinner, his contentment a reminder of the simple joys in life. The following weeks brought a new opportunity that Michael hadn't anticipated. A local school reached out, asking if Max could visit as part of a program to teach children about kindness and responsibility. The idea intrigued Michael, and he agreed to bring Max for a trial visit. The school's principal greeted them warmly, leading them to a classroom filled with excited children. As soon as Max entered, the room erupted in cheers and applause. Max, ever the professional, handled the attention with his usual grace, wagging his tail and allowing each child to pet him. Michael spoke to the class about Max's journey, emphasizing the importance of treating animals with love and respect. "Dogs like Max aren't born heroes," he explained. "They become heroes because someone believed in them, gave them a chance, and showed them kindness. The children listened intently, their eyes wide with wonder. After the talk, Max demonstrated a few of his therapy dog skills, bringing smiles and laughter to everyone in the room. As they left the school that day, Michael felt a renewed sense of purpose. Max wasn't just a companion or a therapy dog, he was a teacher, a bridge between humans and animals, showing people the power of empathy and connection. But life had a way of throwing curveballs, and Michael soon found himself facing an unexpected challenge. During one of their routine vet checkups, the doctor noticed something concerning in Max's blood work. "It's probably nothing," she assured Michael. "But we should run a few more tests just to be sure." Michael tried to stay calm, but the thought of something being wrong with Max filled him with dread. Over the next few days, he anxiously awaited the results, doing his best to keep life normal for Max. When the vet called with the results, her voice was reassuring. "It's nothing serious," she said. "Just a minor issue with his diet. We'll adjust his food, and he should be fine." Relief washed over Michael as he hung up the phone. He knelt beside Max, who was napping in the living room, and wrapped his arms around him. "You scared me, buddy," he whispered. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Max yawned and rested his head on Michael's shoulder, his trust and love as steady as ever. The scare served as a reminder of how precious their time together was. Michael made a vow to cherish every moment, to never take Max's presence for granted. They continued their work as a team, visiting hospitals, schools, and community centers, spreading joy and hope wherever they went. One particularly memorable visit took them to a senior living facility, where Max met a woman named Evelyn. Evelyn was in her late 80s, her frail frame a stark contrast to the vibrant energy in her eyes. She had always loved dogs, but circumstances had never allowed her to have one of her own. When Max approached her, Evelyn's face lit up with a smile that seemed to erase the years from her features. She stroked his fur gently, her hands trembling with age but steady with affection. "You're a good boy," she murmured. "The best boy." Michael watched as Max lay beside Evelyn, his head resting on her lap. It was a simple moment, but one that spoke volumes about the impact Max had on the lives he touched. As they left the facility that day, Evelyn's parting words stayed with Michael. "You've given him a good life," she said, "and he's given you even more." As time went on, Michael realized that Max had become more than just a companion. He was a symbol of hope, resilience, and unconditional love. Their journey together had taught Michael lessons he would carry for the rest of his life: the importance of trust, the power of kindness, and the unbreakable bond between a human and their dog. And while the future was uncertain, one thing was clear: whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, side by side, just as they always had. Michael couldn't shake the words Evelyn had said to him as they walked out of the senior living facility. "You've given him a good life, and he's given you even more." It echoed in his head in the drive home, while Max, as usual, lay sprawled across the back seat, happily panting as the wind streamed through the window. He thought back to the day he had adopted Max. He had been so close to leaving the shelter without him. Max hadn't stood out like some of the other dogs, no loud barking or attention-grabbing antics. But there had been something in his eyes, a quiet but undeniable depth that had drawn Michael in. And now, years later, Max had not only changed Michael's life, but had touched countless others as well. Michael decided it was time to give Max something back. He began planning a weekend getaway, just the two of them, to one of their favorite hiking trails in the nearby mountains. The day of the trip arrived, and Max seemed to sense the excitement. He wagged his tail enthusiastically as Michael packed their supplies: water bottles, snacks, Max's favorite chew toy, and a cozy blanket for the chilly mountain evenings. As they drove toward the trailhead, Max sat upright in the passenger seat, his nose pressed against the window, taking in the familiar sights. When they reached the trail, Michael clipped on Max's leash, and the two set off into the woods. The air was crisp and filled with the earthy scent of pine and damp soil. Max trotted ahead, his ears perked and his tail wagging with every step. The trail was challenging but rewarding, winding through dense forests, across bubbling streams, and up rocky inclines. At one point, they reached a clearing that offered a breathtaking view of the valley below. Michael sat on a boulder, catching his breath, while Max sniffed around the area, his energy seemingly endless. "Take it in, buddy," Michael said, smiling as Max bounded back to him, tail wagging. "This is what it's all about." They continued their hike until they reached a small, secluded campsite near a tranquil lake. Michael set up their tent while Max explored the area, his nose leading him to all sorts of interesting scents. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they sat by the lake, watching the water reflect the fiery hues of the sunset. Michael leaned back against a log, Max curled up beside him. "I don't say it enough, but thank you," Michael said, scratching Max behind the ears. "For everything. You've been my rock, my protector, my best friend." Max responded with a contented sigh, his head resting on Michael's lap. They stayed like that for a while, the quiet of the wilderness wrapping around them like a comforting blanket. The next morning, Michael woke up to the sound of birds chirping and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. Max was already awake, sitting by the edge of the lake and watching the water ripple. Michael joined him, sitting cross-legged on the grass. "Ready for another adventure?" he asked, ruffling Max's fur. Max wagged his tail in response, his enthusiasm as infectious as ever. They spent the day exploring the surrounding trails, discovering hidden waterfalls and quiet meadows. At one point, they came across a group of hikers who instantly recognized Max from the documentary. The hikers were thrilled to meet him, taking pictures and sharing how much his story had inspired them. "Max, you're a celebrity," Michael joked as they continued their hike. "But don't let it go to your head." That evening, as they sat by the campfire, Michael felt a deep sense of gratitude. Life had thrown its fair share of challenges his way, but Max had been as constant through it all. The bond they shared was unshakable, built on trust, loyalty, and an unspoken understanding. As they packed up to leave the next day, Michael noticed something in Max's demeanor, a quiet contentment, as if he too had felt the restorative power of their weekend in the mountains. On the drive home, Max rested his head on Michael's lap, his eyes closing in peaceful slumber. Back home, life returned to its usual rhythm, but the memories of their trip stayed with Michael. He felt renewed, ready to tackle whatever lay ahead, knowing Max would be by his side. But life had a way of testing even the strongest bonds. One evening, as Michael and Max were returning from their nightly walk, they noticed a commotion down the street. A small crowd had gathered outside a neighbor's house, their faces filled with concern. "What's going on?" Michael asked as they approached. "It's the Johnson's son," a woman replied. "Their little boy wandered off, and no one knows where he is." Michael's heart sank. The Johnson's son, Ethan, was only 4 years old. The thought of him lost and scared was unbearable. Without hesitation, Michael turned to Max. "You ready for this, buddy?" Max wagged his tail, his eyes focused and alert. Michael knew Max's sense of smell was extraordinary, and if anyone could find Ethan, it was him. They joined the search, Max sniffing the ground as Michael held his leash. The search party fanned out, calling Ethan's name as they combed the neighborhood. Max led Michael toward a wooded area at the edge of the park, his nose working furiously. "Do you think he went this way?" one of the searchers asked. Michael nodded. "If Max is heading this way, there's a reason." They followed Max deeper into the woods, the trees casting long shadows in the fading light. Michael's heart pounded with anxiety, but he trusted Max completely. After a few tense minutes, Max suddenly stopped, his ears perked. "Do you hear something?" Michael asked, crouching beside him. Max let out a sharp bark, his body tense with focus. Michael listened closely and faintly heard a child's voice calling out. "Over here!" Michael shouted, running in the direction of the sound. They found Ethan sitting at the base of a tree, tears streaming down his face. Max ran to him, licking his cheeks and wagging his tail. Ethan clung to Max, his cries turning to relieved giggles. "It's okay, Ethan," Michael said, picking him up. "We're going to take you back to your parents." Max stayed close, his protective instincts on full display as they made their way out of the woods. When they reunited Ethan with his family, the Johnsons were overcome with gratitude. "Thank you," Ethan's mother said, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for bringing him back." Michael looked down at Max, who was wagging his tail proudly. "It was all him," Michael said, scratching Max behind the ears. "He's the real hero." That night, as Michael and Max settled in for bed, Michael couldn't help but marvel at the dog who had become so much more than a companion. Max had not only saved his life, but had gone on to save others as well. He was a reminder of the incredible power of love, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. "You did good, buddy," Michael said, pulling Max close. "You always do." Max let out a contented sigh, his head resting on Michael's chest. Together, they drifted off to sleep, ready for whatever adventures awaited them next.